Oh my word. Okay, my own mind is quite distracted, doing a lot of different intellectual things at the moment. Anyway, so I want to comment on Terence Corrigan's well written. So I want to give a backhanded compliment here because, like, I want to finish his homework and steal the A, but the high grade belongs to Terence Corrigan because he opened my eyes to something, I think, in that article. But the yeah, so the thing that Terence Corrigan is shedding a light on is like the ideological incongruence between different things on the world stage. Now, I don't like the Ukraine issue from a South African perspective. Like, for anyone in South Africa to have an opinion on Ukraine and to sort of join the Western ruckus or the um, I mean, it's interesting how you could say that, how the West is, one of the mistakes that I would say Terence Corrigan makes, although it's incorrect for me to say that it's a mistake, because relative to the question in the title of the article, it's not a mistake because he's trying to focus on the South African ideological incoherence. And that's what he opened my eyes to. But I do think that he fails to put that into a broader context in terms of the actual Ukraine issue itself. So I'm going to seek to sort of make that deeper context because I think you can't really have a pro Zelensky international position on Ukraine unless if being pro Zelensky is essentially tantamount to wanting regime change in Russia. That's what it's a proxy for. That's all it's a proxy for, essentially. It could be a proxy for a lot more, but Ukraine, the facts don't support that. If we actually look at how bad Ukraine has been to its own parts of its own population, okay, and when that context gets brought into the picture, then Putin starts looking quite different. He looks perhaps a bit like a good Samaritan, okay. So if we want to frame this, sort of in the balance of power politics between America and Russia, between oligarchs and the military industrial complex, then we can almost blame America more than Russia, even though Russia is the one who has the problems in their own backyard, essentially. Because I think that in some sense there is a Cold War codependency between oligarchs and the American industrial complex. I think that's obvious. That's essentially what's going on. They need each other. But why do they need each other? They need each other, so like the problems of Russia, the municipal problems of Russia, I would argue are don't just belong to Russia, and we actually have to take a more balanced view of Putin. Now, I mean, who am I to contradict Christopher Hitchens? Christopher Hitchens has a wonderful opinion on Putin. Uh, there's just like, he's a dictator, he sucks, we can't tolerate these sorts of things. Now, that's a very hard line to take, and I think that in sort of as a general principle, it's correct. When people have structures like that are fundamentally sort of opaque and that they allow for corruption. But what does that opaque structure actually afford in the world? It affords that there is at least some counter to what what we seem to be moving away from, which is American unilateral unipolar world domination. Okay, um, you know, where would we be if Edward Snowden had no place to go home to uh, on his way back to America? Like where can whistleblower? Sorry, I misworded that. But where can Edward Snowden go in the interim to find his way back into the American fold? If there's no place that he can seek sanctuary from. Um, so that's an interesting kind of point to be made. That Do we really want to live in a world where there's absolutely no check on American, uh, let's say, messaging and symbolic propaganda and all those sorts of things? Um, Now, don't get me wrong, obviously, the American system is a better system to live under, although it does make one slightly paranoid perhaps, because it's not as if America doesn't have its own secret, sort of deep state structures that are probably, just as nefarious as, even, the historic KGB, etc., etc. But anyway, so what really is the point here? Well, my point is that, is Putin really such a bad boy? I mean, did he not come cap in hand to the West asking for help to clean up Russia, to fix the problems of Russia? Did he find any willing partners willing to help him? No. I mean, if we just contextualize history, just notice how, I mean, we forced, I think, Putin was forced into the arms of the oligarchs. Without a transitional trajectory. I mean, look at what was done for China. If that kind of largesse was perhaps provided to Russia in such a strategic way, but it wasn't. Why wasn't it? Because Clinton is a shitty statesman. He just was not that intelligent. Essentially, it wasn't that. I mean, maybe if we could have 30 years of what's his name? What was his name? The guy who got impeached? Nixon. If we could have 30 years of America being run by a real statesman, you know, at least there would be some. I mean, Nixon was fixing Russia, but he was cut short and then replaced by people who. Uh, anyway, so I mean that's. You know, history's an interesting thing. Anyway, what is my point? So my point is that I mean, what is going on in Russia? I mean, sorry, what is going on in Ukraine? I mean, what happened in the lead up to this? Was everything just a kind of was this? I don't even want to speculate, but I mean, sort of, there are three things that are likely possible, that are the only sort of possible things that I can see. This is either Azov in Ukraine is a CIA kind of culturally developed beachfront. Uh, sorry, beachhead. Um, that I mean, looks like that they. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, is the Russian army going to be defeated inside Ukraine by a very motivated? Um, uh, I mean, was this whole thing essentially a trap um, for Russia? Which is why there were, let's say, these. The whole thing was designed by Ukraine perhaps to reclaim its lost territory. Like, how do you take back Crimea? You take back Crimea by instigating an escalation and winning militarily. I mean, was that actually sort of the master move? Because I mean, what people don't know is that the natural law was contravened by Ukraine. You're not supposed to. I mean, at least in the substantive municipal law that I know about, is that you're not supposed to stop the flow of water from higher to lower ground. and the channel feeding Crimea's water source has been cut by Ukraine. So that's, but I mean, is that appropriate in the context? I mean, are you not? They talk about suing for peace. Is that suing for peace, or is that suing for war? Um, is that a crime against humanity to stop the flow of water from the mainland Ukraine to Crimea? Uh, so that already made Crimea uneasy. That you had to truck water. I mean, Russia, which is not such a rich country, then to keep its possession, its military possession of Crimea, essentially, or I mean, I'm talking about the naval bases, essentially. Um, then has to truck water because Ukraine still has territorial. And in essence, isn't this just a manifestation of the fact that Ukraine is de facto part of NATO, or it's a kind of like a satellite. It is de facto acting as a satellite of NATO when it really should have stayed neutral, but they didn't want to stay neutral because they wanted more protection against future Russian interference. Because let's just remember the Russian puppet who used to be in charge in Ukraine and how bad living conditions were in Ukraine. So if you actually look at the historical experience of Ukrainians and you put that context in, and you understand the resentment against Russia, and let's say the proclivity towards NATO allegiance or association or joining. Okay, so this is you know the people of Ukraine on the ground. This is what they want. It's about them as well, but it's also about the fact that there is essentially a majority of a Ukrainian identity who don't see themselves as Soviet or former Soviet, or sort of, they don't have the Russian identity. Uh, I don't actually understand the language differences, but there obviously are distinct language differences. There are Russian speaking people in Ukraine and there are non Russian speaking people in Ukraine. In some sense, it would have been better, perhaps more above board, for them to say, well, just take the Donbass regions, because we don't want to have a country that is incorporated under the banner of two languages. We want to be like the other European nations, where well, not all of them, but most of the European nations are a single kind of language. Although, anyway, so this is a kind of democracy that is modeling itself after a kind of European democracy. But if we take a broader view and include Russia, Russia is doing this for completely different reasons. Russia is doing this for balance of power politics. It's literally because countries are vulnerable to land uh, conventional, you know, military. Sorry, I can't think of the technical term. Staged military conventional deployments and capture. Like ground armies. You know, exist, and Russia has tried to sue for peace, and no one has made peace with it. And I would say, unless you don't believe Putin has asked for help, and now it's sort of too late. He's in the grip of the spider web of the oligarchs. Okay, so is this not just history playing itself out? Um, but the clever Americans who, maybe I'm still ultimately on their side. Um, Maybe this is all part of their machination, it's all part of their diplomacy, it's all part of the groundwork that they laid down. Because it's not like the Ukrainians just decided this all on their own. It was also let's say, encouraged by American influence because, how do they call it on the internet? You get the bait, Ukraine was the bait and Russia took the bait because they thought that it was for the taking. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe the object is regime change. Or maybe not. Maybe it doesn't have to be regime change from the outside, but orientation from the inside. Um, sorry, there's probably a better word for it than that. Hmm. So it's interesting. I mean, somewhat tragic because you would think that you could just sort this thing out around a dinner table or around a conference table, something like that. But when you've got two things like a group of oligarchs and a military industrial complex, I don't think there is a resolution. I don't think that there's an easy way out of that. Hmm. So really, I mean, it always depends. How far back are you willing to go in terms of framing the problem and the issue? And also you have to look at the proximate outcomes of the possibilities of the future. You know, I've heard a credible analysis that if Ukraine's military succeeds in rebuffing Russia and, let's say, reunifying Ukraine and securing its territory, what's going to happen to the Russian-speaking people in the Donbass region? Is that territory going to be ceded as part of the deal? Maybe that's what Zelensky is hoping to negotiate. We can only hope that those negotiations go quickly, um, and that there's some kind of settlement. I mean, Zelensky certainly has a lot of bargaining chips. They've got the channel, the water channel to Crimea. I mean, can they somehow get Crimea back? But I don't know what's going to happen to the naval bases. The problem is demographics, is that Crimea is literally kind of 50-50 demographically. So, you could say that the demographic uh, inflation of the Russian-speaking people in Crimea was essentially it was a form of ethnic cleansing, or let's say, it's interesting. I mean, ethnic cleansing is a very strange topic. It's kind of like systemic oppression. It's kind of nebulous, depending on how slowly you ethnically cleanse someone. I mean, uh, demographics is destiny. Um, Language, culture, political containers that are not capable of transmitting information between each other because of, let's say, contention constraints or bandwidth. Um, just separating people by language, and then you can sort of sell them a separate reality with their identity. Yeah, this all kind of, in my view, gets down to sort of liberal individualism. Is sort of the only sort of unifying panacea of that. I think that the problem with so-called progressive liberals who don't really understand much libertarian philosophy, they've kind of got a very watered down version of it, which then allows them to sort of have their own totalitarian aspiration or something like that. It's been taken over by a certain type of personality, a certain sort of section of the population, which really, those are the people that should be gossipers. They should, you know, they should be lowly kind of people, but instead they are sort of elevated to sort of teaching posts and opinion controllers and sort of which I mean hopefully we're learning that the masses are not there's a reason why pure democracy is a bad idea. um, Anyway, so I mean, if we actually judge Ukraine by some of those standards, we actually get a very different picture. Unless we're willing to say that how Ukraine was essentially ethnically cleansing its Russian-speaking people that it had connection to in as a kind of as a Cold War about its territorial loss because of the Russian incursion over Crimea, because essentially the legitimacy of the referendum was not accepted. I mean, you think that there could have been an outside mediator, but no side wanted an outside mediator for that. Because in some sense the referendum was a sham to begin with, or it was staged, or it was a ploy, or something like that. It was Russia flexed its muscles, so because of the balance of power aspect. It's very strange that they couldn't just create. They say Russia wants a warm water port. I don't know, why don't they just sort of technologically solve the problem? They're not a technological solution. Man, I'm so geographically ignorant. I mean, what is that? What is Crimea? I don't know what the surrounding sea is even called. If it's called sort of the Croatian coastline or something like that. But I mean, can't some special submarine facility, some special naval base be built that sort of, I don't know. I mean, how much does the top get frozen? I mean, is it? I guess, or is that the point? Is that it's not for the submarines? It's actually for the boats that are actually above the water. They also want to have always access to that from that. You would think sort of just technologically, that there's a kind of solution. I mean, you really need navy boats. Can't you just sort of have? Uh, that's a bit too crazy. I was just going to say like a kind of some kind of flying thing that like becomes a boat or something like that, you know, or even like anyway. I mean, sorry, this isn't. I'm talking about geopolitics, and here I am thinking about sci-fi things. You know, like what was it? You know, in the comic books, you know, they have those big. What was it called? Starts with an S. You know, oh my word. I can't believe I've forgotten what the name of the agency is called.